There you go. Calvin Dark, Democratic strategist, principal and co-founder of RC Communications, joins us on the show. Calvin, welcome to the show. It seems like Biden's more concerned about the Ukraine border, gets his blood going, than he is about our own.
Well, I have faith that President Joe Biden can walk and chew gum at the same time. So I think he can do not only both, but multiple things at one time. I'll say it like that.
He can't even walk and do nothing at the same time. He shakes hands with ghosts, Calvin. What are you talking about? He is more fired up about Ukraine, and he says he's got a border czar with fired up about illegals being dumped off in her front yard. But Calvin, what did they say when Biden was throwing illegals on planes and buses in the middle of the night to Jacksonville, Florida?
Well, I think the first thing to recognize is these aren't illegals. I personally don't think that any human being is an illegal, but for the purposes of this, these were people that have been processed and they're waiting, adjudication. So I would hope that the governors of Florida and Texas didn't ship people who should have been deported to another place. I think that's aiding and abetting. I'm not a lawyer. So they weren't illegals. Also, I do agree that with one of the things that Vice President Harris did was, she's visited the Central American countries, because I think we kind of need to figure out what are the push and pull factors that are contributing to it. So, I haven't been to the border, but I have feelings about it and ideas. So I don't think that's necessarily should be factored into her grade.
Number one, we do have laws on the books that if you come in here illegally, you're here illegally. So humans are illegal. If you rob a bank, you're now an illegal bank robber. I mean, people are deemed illegal when they do illegal acts, and they face trials and adjudication for that. Now, here's the thing. When the Biden regime is not processing correctly people coming across the border illegally, not giving them classification numbers, not only do these people disappear into society, but they're setting historical records. Unaccompanied children, all-time highs. 2 million people coming in illegally. And you ask them, Calvin, they're saying it's because Joe Biden opened the border. The border is wide open. The Central American countries have problems, but we're not supposed to take their worst and their most empty jail people and bring them into our country.
Well, I think first of all, in our country, when people are in the judicial process, and by the way, most do come back because they
only 13% report back when they're released into the country. Only 13%.
Well, I think the figures are different from that, but regardless of that, I do want to point out something you said that I do believe, and this is part of the problem in our immigration system that exists now under the Biden administration, but also existed under the former administration, actually probably the last 4, is coming up with a system of classifying people when they do come into the country that makes them easier to track. I totally think that is, what we need to do. Now, I do have to push back on, I still hear the echoes of former President Trump when he deemed a whole class of people as rapists, murderers, and I forgot the other adjectives that he used. I don't think it's fair, and I don't think it actually helps to assume that migrants who are coming here are criminals. And, I've been over the last few weeks, reading a lot of these stories and hearing, people going through 7 countries to get here from, Venezuela and other places. These seem like the kind of people that, whether or not they should stay here, that's a different legal issue, but they don't look like the folks that are causing the problems in their country. They look like they actually just want to come and have a better life. And maybe we could use it with the available jobs we have.
Trump said in that group, they're not sending their best and their brightest. Some are rapists and murderers, just like the illegal immigrant who came into Tampa, Florida, and murdered a foster family by lying about his age and saying the family took him in and he slashed the father. There are criminals and drugs pouring in. The cartels have a big hand in this. So there are rapists. We know that through the trek itself, there's been many cases of rape of young girls, older girls. We've seen horrific details of accounts that are happening. The cartels have a big hand in this. Yes, rapists, murderers and apprehended terrorists have been coming through that border, but also the drugs that are killing Americans. So yes, it is a big percentage of problems.
If that's true, and I'm not saying that there aren't people amongst those groups, but I mean, come on, if we're talking about the number of 2 million, how many are we talking? And I think the bigger issue is we need to, anybody who's committing the crimes you just talked about, be they American, not American or whatever, go after them. I don't want them here. Who wants them here? But it doesn't help the immigration debate if we start painting with that broad brush. Because I mean, come on, I get it that there are definitely drugs coming into this country, and I am for fixing that problem. Same thing with all these other crimes. The people that I saw coming across the border, I don't think they're interested in that. I think they want to get a job, provide for their families, and try to find a better life. I'm proud as an American that they would try to come here to at least apply to do that.
Calvin, I appreciate your discussion on this. And as you notice, we're two different opposing views here, and Calvin gets to say his piece. I get to say mine. It's great. But if you step foot in this country illegal, all 2 million of you are breaking the law. You're here illegally. So every one of them is a criminal, 100%. And these 25-year-olds that you see getting off the bus that are claiming asylum but going through several countries to get here, they're just trying to get to America. Stay and fight for your country. If it's a real asylum claim, you have to make that case, and you don't go through several countries to claim asylum.
I mean, you know, I don't share that view, and I'm certainly glad that's not the law, because there are certain immigrant groups, not just from Central America, but from other countries, who came here and made a better life for themselves, and in some cases, with their inventions and companies, made life better for us. And I think it's good leadership for the United States for us to be the place to come to give people that chance. But I think the larger issue is, a lot of the things that you mentioned do reflect that our immigration system is broken. And for that, I do blame the White House and I blame Congress now. And like I said, the last 3 or 4, we need to come up with solutions that actually get us past trying to paint immigrants and asylum seekers as criminals, but to think, okay, what can they bring to the United States? What are we going to do to our system to make that process of deciding whether they stay here efficient, and to catch up with what's happening at the southern border?
I agree with you. We need a merit-based immigration system. Let's see what you bring to the country instead of swimming through the Rio Grande River. That would be best, and follow a legal process to do that. What do you say to the millions of Hispanic Americans that did follow the process and came here legally, and then they're seeing this record-setting amount of illegals coming in here? I mean, they don't look at that as a fair system. We had also remain in Mexico policy and enlisted the Mexican government to help out with border security. That drove down the numbers and created a more humane process. Instead of having people being displaced or locked up in a cage, it seemed like that was a better way to do it.
Well, first of all, when you say merit-based, you know, I don't agree with that, just because the way that it's practiced. Merit-based are usually people that don't look like me and darker, just to let you know that that's why when I hear merit-based, I hear white and Scandinavian. But
no, I'm not talking about race. I'm talking about simply, if somebody's released from a Honduran prison and comes to America, that's a concern. I don't care what color they are. But if you actually have something to bring as value to the country and you have an application process, more power to you.
Right. And you know what? That's why the people who are in this country who did cross, I want them to have their adjudication, because if they did come from a Honduran prison, I want to know about it, and they shouldn't be here. But that does not reflect the cases of the vast majority of the immigrants that are trying to come to our country. And, you know, most people probably had a relative not too far back that did the same thing in one form or another. So that's why I think, you know, look, we should definitely vet everyone who's coming through here. As you mentioned, the system doesn't work. It doesn't catch up with them. Totally agree with you with that. But it doesn't help to fix the immigration situation of the people who are here, to demonize and say they're all prisoners and all of that. Let's think about solutions.
No, we're not saying that. We're not saying that they're all prisoners. We're not saying that they all escaped from an Honduran prison.
Some of them may have escaped from the universities in Honduras. You know, we don't know. Let's find out.
There are some people that are in desperation, or they're trying to seek a better life. I understand that, but there is a legal process to do it. Right. And when the people that make the laws are helping them break the law easier, and breaking the law simply means you came here illegally. We do have the law in the book. There is a more humane way to do it. Calvin, I'll give you an opportunity to say, what do you think are some more humane ways to not just encourage legal immigration so people don't have to risk their lives doing it the way they're doing it now?
Right, exactly. And one of the things that I think is unfortunate is when you look at what candidates and current governors DeSantis and Abbott are doing. Talk about an ad to come to the United States. Not only do you get here, but we'll send you to Martha's Vineyard. That doesn't help. But I think that when we're coming up with a system that works, as somebody I'm from North Carolina, as you can hear from this accent, I've lived abroad quite a bit, right? I've had to go through immigration systems in the countries that I've lived. One of them was in South America, Argentina. I think that we should have a system to where these claims can be adjudicated. Now, I think that they should be able to be reviewed from their country of origin. I mean, the problem is that we have such a backlog that that's not possible. And we also don't have relationships with a lot of the countries like Venezuela and Cuba to where we could do that. But I think that's one solution, because I think you should be able to apply for asylum. Problem is that most people can't from the country of origin, or if they do, that it won't be until 5, 6, 7 years, which is not a realistic solution.
From the country of origin, I can agree with that. Hey, put your application in there so they can clean up that process here at home. But they're just not seeing that, and that's just a solution.
Well,
that's
because
the Biden administration is not going to listen to you on that solution.
No, the option isn't there. It's not as if they just say, "Hey, I don't want to go to the embassy down the road." That's not a way that they can apply for it in a lot of countries. I'm saying that we should strengthen that procedure to at least get people in the countries of origin where they are safe. Obviously, it doesn't work for countries that are not safe, where they can apply. And, we can then find out who are the people that want to come in. Do they enrich our society? And do we want to give them legal status?
No, that's a plan I could get behind. Now, when you talk about DeSantis and Governor Abbott, what they're doing is in Texas and in Florida, we are not sanctuary states. And there's this big sign in Martha's Vineyard that said, equity and diversity and inclusion, all are welcome. The first thing they did in Martha's Vineyard is get those 50 people out of there and put them on a military base.
Actually, no, they did get them out of there. But the first thing they did was they found housing, food, and actually asked them, where do you want to go? By the way, a lot of these migrants didn't even know where they were going. And,
well, they did release, DeSantis released the consent forms that every one of the people on that plane signed. Also, Massachusetts is a sanctuary state. They sent them there. They told them where they were going. And it's not like we sent them to Beirut, Martha's Vineyard.
Right. And, I think that obviously DeSantis did this. He's running for reelection, taxpayer subsidized campaign reelection ad. But that aside, I think he did it to shame the people of Martha's Vineyard. And I was very proud to see that even with no notice, these people stood up and they did it. And the reason that they were sent, I believe, was to Cape Cod, wasn't because they didn't want them. It's because there was a military base that had been set up as an emergency shelter. You didn't hear folks complaining about that in Martha's Vineyard. But, if we step back, this obviously has been on the news with DeSantis and Abbott. I actually, even though I don't agree with them, I don't think on anything, any kind of policy, I would be willing to hear them out if they got on a bus or plane, came to Washington, and if they want to come in front of Vice President Harris's house, do that. Come with a plan, come with a solution, demand Congress and the White House act. I actually might be behind that. But when they sent those immigrants there and probably called Fox News and others to make sure they saw them when they landed and didn't call the local authorities, that shows me they have no interest in actually solving the problem. And the poor immigrants, they didn't ask to be a part of his reelection campaign video. Come on.
Well, when you talk about the process of shipping migrants across the country, where do you think they got the idea from? Joe Biden was shipping these guys throughout the middle of the night, New York, Florida, Texas, all over the place. And that's when the governor stood up and said, hey, no, you can't do this. We did not sign off on this. We don't want these people here. And if you want to process them through a sanctuary process, we're going to send them to a sanctuary state. That's what they claim. You put it on paper, but when it actually comes to their backyard, the people of Martha's Vineyard did complain about it. George Soros funded $1.3 million behind a claim from a radical group to sue Governor DeSantis, even though he provided the documentation that said, hey, these people willingly went. This is a...
Well, I think when
Rule
you
for thee, but not for me kind of situation.
Now, it's not quite, because here's the thing. When you mentioned with the flights that would have happened under the Biden administration, if Governor Abbott and Governor DeSantis had wanted to emulate that, they forgot one important part, and that was to notify the people who would be receiving them and to not deceive them, saying that they would have jobs and money and all of these other things. Instead, sending people, which I still don't get why Governor DeSantis is spending. I have friends in Florida. Why he's spending my friend's tax money deporting people from a state that's not his. Like, if they wanted to do what the Biden administration is doing, they left out a key part of not dumping people without notice. And that is where a lot of this problem arises.
Well, according to Florida, there wasn't any notice for the Jacksonville 3 a.m. flights. They were called the night of and had to locate some assets to get over there and take care of this problem.
And
what I would rather prefer,
they should find somebody to sue the Biden administration if that is true, because in court facts would come out.
We don't want to go through litigation. We want to solve a problem here. And the problem is Florida, Texas, and Arizona, Florida's not a border state, but Texas and Arizona with the border states, they have a major problem of thousands a day. They don't have the resources to take care of these people. So yeah, the ones that come to other states might ship them somewhere else, more like a sanctuary state. We have to, if we were doing it my way, we'd ship them all back to where they came from and go through the process that you talked about. If you're going to apply for asylum, you have to go through that UN down the road, that embassy down the road, and apply like anybody else. But this record-setting situation is because of signaling from the administration, Calvin, that says, come on in. And they say otherwise, but they say, come on in by the process they put in place.
And signaling from Abbott and DeSantis that they get to be dropped off in Times Square, or Martha's Vineyard. So, and like I said,
true.
I acknowledge what you're saying, especially when you mentioned one of the things I wanted to just point out, when you mentioned the border communities in the states. I've watched a lot of people from there, officials and local residents. It's a shame dealing with all of these people that are coming over, even though they're getting federal funding. I mean, I'm sure it's woefully insignificant, but that's why we need to get together to come up with a solution, because this just exacerbates it. One, it just makes people mad. And that is never a good component of finding a solution. And I think if we took away the campaign reelection drama from Florida and Texas and actually focused on the problem, I think we could put pressure on the White House, Congress, and others to do it. Maybe me and you could come up with solutions to do it.
Yeah.
But shipping people away or trying to troll Martha's Vineyard and other sanctuary places — I'm proud to live in a sanctuary city — like that doesn't really help.
Well, I think it helps in one major aspect. We're having this conversation today. Governor DeSantis and Governor Abbott, what they have done is, and Abbott today calling the cartels terrorists and making an executive order on that allows the conversation to happen. You can look at it as a political stunt, but when it comes to Kamala Harris's front door, maybe Kamala Harris should say, hey, you know what? Maybe we should talk about this. And I think if they went out, Biden and Harris said, and I think you'll agree with me on this, if they went out and said, you know what, border states, let's have a meeting, let's have a talk. I think Arizona, Texas, I think everybody should come. And I think they should have an on-camera discussion about this. Maybe because you and I, Calvin, completely disagree on most things. I've seen your Twitter, by the way. We could talk about 1,000 things that you tweeted that I disagree with. But in a conversation, a normal, regular conversation, I bet you and I could come up with a couple of solutions. We've already skimmed the surface of doing that just on this discussion today. I'd like to see them open the door and make this happen.
And you know what? I think what you just described, it's we're on the same page. It's kind of like what I described a few moments ago. This is the problem. I can honestly say that if Governor Abbott or DeSantis had come up here or, had called on the White House to, have a summit, do whatever you want to call that forum and meeting, I would have at least said, you know what, we need to hear what they have to say. They are down there at the border, not DeSantis, but, Arizona and Texas dealing with this. And like you said, it would put pressure on Vice President Harris and President Biden to do something, to actually come out with a plan, which I would like to see. But the problem is that when you troll people, when you ship people at rush hour on right in front of the Naval Observatory, you automatically lose your credibility for being a stakeholder that has real solutions. And I remember a couple of years ago with the caravans, how that was the big thing. I don't know if they're still coming. I know they were 2 years ago, and we're going to terrorize
Every
the United
day
States.
there's a caravan now, every day.
But you remember how that was like the big issue, and everybody was up in arms about it. And I do think there was an immigration issue that we needed to tackle. But when the election was over, caravan seemed to have just disappeared. So maybe
Well, you don't
at
have
some
to,
point,
well, go ahead and finish your thought.
well, no, they may have they disappeared. I know from the talking points of Republicans that were running for office, and I hope that in our border states we would get leadership that would be tough and demand solutions, but not use people as pawns. You got people. I saw the one of them, a 1 month old baby. I get it if you don't think that 1 month old baby should be here, but that does not excuse shipping them on a bus where they dubiously their parents understood where they were going or what would be there when they arrived.
Well, the unaccompanied children is a real crisis. There's kids being sent here alone. Just today, I saw a report on a 6 and a 2-year-old left alone with notes written on their shirt. I mean, the reason this has to be dealt with is for the sake of those kids. AOC crying at the border under Trump, with the fake tears at that facility with the kids. We're actually housing more kids down there 3 times as much than when she was making those phony tears. I mean, with the kids alone, Calvin, this is a crisis. This is a crisis on so many levels. But when I see pictures of a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old left alone to fend for themselves, and then they finally get picked up with notes on their shirts of where to go. This thing from top to bottom is horrific. And I don't care how it's done. One thing we got to do is curb this thing. These 25-year-old men getting off the bus. That's a problem. What are you guys doing here? Why aren't you fighting for your own country? But the kids have nothing to say about this. The kids aren't making these decisions. Somebody else is making a decision about these kids. That is something that needs to be dealt with immediately. And all the stunts from everybody, we need to get that fixed right away.
And that's why I really agree with, I thought we were going to be able to do this in the Obama administration. The Trump administration weren't, not even yet in the Biden administration. Let's fix the dreamer status. Let's put aside a minute the people who obviously made conscious choices to come here for whatever the reason is. These kids didn't. And, I grew up with kids who are considered dreamers, and I'm not a little kid anymore. That would be an easy step. And I think that if Republicans would put out a gesture that they will be willing to entertain that, to give these people a path to citizenship, these kids that came against their will, that would give a lot of goodwill to Democrats and independents that Republicans are really interested in solving the problem. But that hasn't happened. And it's not just Republicans. Like I said, there have been successive administrations that did not do anything, except for President Barack Obama, who at least did try within his power to do something, but it wasn't permanent.
Kids that weren't born here but have grown up here because their parents brought them here, that is an easy fix. We all understand that. We're talking about the real crisis with drugs and unaccompanied children and people just pouring in by the thousands a day. I mean, the Dreamers thing is an easy fix. A lot of people agreed with that. I just the parents need to face some sort of restitution to the country, or make sure that they pay something for coming here illegally. But yeah, don't blame the kid that they brought. These kids are you talk about victims and pawns in this situation. It's definitely the children who aren't making any of these decisions. Somebody else is making this decision. And when you hear about the deaths, we got to stop the deaths of children, the raping of women. We got to stop that somehow. And that's what I want to get to the bottom of. It's not just
when you mentioned the drugs too, like one of the things that I learned this week was the mass amount of drugs. They're not coming from these immigrants that are walking through the countries. Most of them are smuggled in through the ports of entry. I saw this great thing yesterday where they were x-raying the trucks and they found the drugs. So, I think we have to disassociate a little bit the migrants that we're talking about, and the drug problem, yes, they're all related to our broken immigration system, but all of these immigrants aren't bringing in the drugs. Like that's something that we need to make sure we separate, or else society is going to think that these people who landed in these sanctuary cities are all packed with meth and fentanyl, which isn't the case.
Which is the case in a lot of situations. They have caught a record number of drugs. And a lot of this comes from China when you talk about the fentanyl, by the way. It's coming from China. China has put their foothold into these Central American countries, and that's where it's coming from.
But not through the immigrants. A lot of them are coming smuggled. I saw something yesterday. They had bags of drugs, hidden in a gas tank. And I'm glad that the Border Control caught them. But like the immigrants that we see who are making the trek through 7 countries, the vast majority of them are not carrying pounds of drugs.
No, those guys aren't, but there is a significant amount of drug trafficking getting through, and they're getting through. They're catching a record amount, but a record amount's also getting through. There's drug traffickers, there's children, there's people looking for a better life, there's people trying to scam the system. There's criminals, there's rapists. All these things are true. You can't lump the whole group together, because in this group, there's many different scenarios. I think we can agree on that. And we've seen evidence of all of those scenarios playing out.
Right. And I think if you separate the drugs, the crime, which is the vast minority of the people that we're talking about, deal with that. I don't want anybody coming in my country that's carrying, backpacks of drugs, but they didn't ship. I hope DeSantis didn't ship people with backpacks of drugs to Martha's Vineyard, because I'm not a lawyer, but
no, those people were vetted and
right. So they're not illegal, as he was saying, and so that's why, let's not deal with the crime situation, but then paint the people that taxpayers sent to go to Chicago, New York, DC, Martha's Vineyard as being the cause of the problem. That's why I don't think DeSantis and Abbott are leaders. They're trollers. They're not leaders, because they are trying to score points. They are not trying to solve the solution.
I think they're trying to make the discussion happen. You guys set sanctuary policies in place. Calvin, in your city, we'll start sending them there until you guys come to the table and fix this problem. Because right now, especially the border states, are completely overwhelmed. Final note, and I'll give you the final word. We agree that there's a problem. We agree about the kids, the drugs. We agree about the people trying to claim asylum from certain aspects. But one thing we both we don't agree on the asylum thing. I'm sorry. But one thing we both agree on is the fact that there is a problem and we need to fix it.
Yes, there's a problem and we need to fix it. We just need leaders, not DeSantis and Abbott and others who aren't interested in the solution. We need leaders that can actually come to the table with solutions, make pressure in a mature way, not for media or whatever DeSantis and Abbott's points are. And I do agree with you that we need to put pressure on our current government, but doing it with the trolling doesn't help. It also puts people in the middle that they already have a hard enough life. Whether or not we allow them to stay here, we definitely don't need to involve them in our political shenanigans.
I can prove to you real quick that Abbott and DeSantis are both leaders, because they're doing things that are action, and the White House is only reacting. They're not providing solutions. They talk about these stupid things that they've done with funding, spending money. That doesn't solve the problem. They're just reacting and getting angry about what DeSantis and Abbott are doing, which I think are calling attention to the problem. We need real solutions here, and the White House has no interest in real solution. They see voters. That's all they see. They think these guys are going to be voters for them. That's all they want is voters. Well, that's why they're trying to pass legislation in New York and other places to let illegals vote. That's what it's all about. Voters.
I mean, that's another issue, and that's not on a wide scale or for national voting or anything like that. I will say, though, when it comes to voters, if I was a citizen of Florida and my governor spent $12,000 plus per migrant to send them to Martha's Vineyard, I'd be quite upset. And I think that the citizens in these states who are understandably not pleased with the immigration situation, I hope that they would tell their leaders, like, quit the stunts. Like, let's actually fix this. If you've got people in El Paso that are homeless and that the people in El Paso think they're being overburdened, how about instead of $12,000 a pop to send to Martha's Vineyard, provide some shelter and food and figure out a way to get their cases adjudicated faster so that we can get through this immigration crisis.
No, I say thank you, Governor DeSantis. We do have budget for this. We're in a surplus here in Florida. Thank you for getting the illegals out of Florida. Well, let's keep law and order going here in Florida. I appreciate that. But I'd rather send them back to where they came from. But it was fun seeing the Martha Vineyard residents squirm. I'll give you that. And it did create a conversation. Calvin Dark, RC Communications, how can people get in a hold of you, find you, give your links?
They can go to my Twitter, is probably the easiest way, at Tails Dark Side, or my website, calvindark.com, or rccomsdc.com.
Thank you for bringing Tales from the Dark Side to the Matt Buff Show. We appreciate it.
Glad to be here.
All right, sounds good.